Mark was driving his truck along a desolate highway, the landscape around him dominated by tall shrubs and scattered trees that swayed in the gentle breeze. A light drizzle fell from the overcast sky, and Mark found himself quietly appreciating the rare solitude. The road was eerily quiet, with not a single vehicle passing by for miles. Suddenly, as he rounded a corner, he caught sight of a lone figure standing in the middle of the road. Slamming on the brakes, he screeched to a halt, his heart pounding with alarm. He realized that he had nearly hit a young woman. She looked disheveled, her clothes damp from the rain and her hair in tangled strands. Even in her state of distress, there was a striking beauty in her features, though a faint bruise on her cheek suggested she had been through some ordeal. Mark hesitated, thinking he should scold her for appearing so suddenly. But the moment their eyes met, all anger vanished. Something about her presence compelled him to remain silent. The young woman approached the driver's side window, eyes pleading. She asked for help, a ride to the nearby church. Mark glanced around and realized they were indeed in a deserted stretch of land with no sign of shelter or transportation. Without a second thought, he invited her into the truck's front seat. Though the rain intensified, an inexplicable tension hovered in the air. As Mark resumed driving, a flood of questions filled his mind. Who was she, and why was she out here alone? His curiosity mingled with a subtle unease. Neither of them spoke much, but Mark felt as though this unexpected encounter was about to lead him down a path he could never have anticipated. He had no idea this meeting would alter his fate. Mark could feel the tension from the young woman as he maneuvered his truck back onto the slick road. Rain tapped the windshield, and the headlights illuminated a narrow path stretching into darkness. He stole occasional glances at his passenger, noticing how her fingers trembled. She did not speak, but her rigid posture suggested deep fear, as though any question might shatter her fragile composure. After several minutes, Mark cleared his throat. "I'm Mark," he said. The young woman turned her gaze toward him. Though fatigue dulled her eyes, a quiet resolve shone there. "I'm Catherine," she replied, then added, "Sister Catherine." The weight of her title hung in the cramped cab. Mark merely nodded, fighting the urge to inquire further. Something about her aura stirred both curiosity and concern. They continued through the storm, wipers clunking in a relentless beat. Occasionally, Mark noticed the bruise on Sister Catherine's cheek. He wanted to ask how she'd been hurt, yet sensed this was neither the time nor place. The tension around her acted like a barrier, warning him to keep his distance. At last, a small church spire emerged from the haze, barely visible in the faint glow of the headlights. A weathered gate stood at the entrance, partially hidden by swirling fog. Sister Catherine exhaled shakily, whether in relief or dread, Mark couldn't tell. He guided the truck down a gravel path and brought it to a stop. He switched off the engine, his heart thudding in his chest. She thanked him in a subdued voice, her words tinged with both gratitude and something unspoken, perhaps fear. As she reached for the door, her lips curved into a fleeting smile that sent a tremor through Mark. Unsure what else to do, he only nodded, watching her slip into the drizzle. The rain had tapered off, leaving beads of moisture on the stained glass windows. Sister Catherine paused at the heavy doors, lifting a hand in silent acknowledgement before vanishing inside. For a moment, Mark remained still, words unspoken. A faint unease settled over him, as if he had glimpsed a secret beyond his understanding. Little did he know, this was only the threshold of a mystery that would soon consume his life. He lingered behind the steering wheel, trying to quell the questions brewing in his mind. Despite knowing her, he sensed that Sister Catherine's plight was intertwined with the hidden truth. 4 days passed, yet the memory of Sister Catherine lingered in Mark's mind. He would catch himself replaying their brief interaction in the truck, wondering why she had seemed so fearful and what circumstances had left her bruised. Late one afternoon, while grabbing a quick meal at a roadside diner, a breaking news report on the television drew his attention. A reporter announced the discovery of a body in a nearby wooded area, one belonging to a young nun identified as Sister Catherine. Mark froze, gripping his cup so tightly that hot coffee splashed onto his hand. Confusion flooded him. The newscast insisted she had died 4 days ago, yet he had met her precisely 4 days earlier on that lonely stretch of road. According to the report, there were clear signs of violence. Authorities believed she had been attacked and left in the wilderness. Stunned, Mark struggled to comprehend the timing. He remembered how calm she appeared during their drive, despite a hint of underlying tension. Had she truly been alive at that time, or was there some chilling twist beyond rational explanation? The news segment replayed Sister Catherine's photograph, confirming without question it was the same woman he had dropped off at the church. Heart-pounding, Mark paid for his meal and hurried outside. He climbed into his truck, hands shaking as he switched on the ignition. Doubt and disbelief swirled within him. How was it possible that the same person he had assisted was now declared dead before he even met her? As he drove away from the diner, Mark's thoughts turned to the church. Though the idea of returning filled him with dread, he realized that he needed answers. Something inexplicable had happened, and he was determined to uncover the truth. Unable to shake his growing sense of unease, Mark decided to drive back to the church where he had last seen Sister Catherine. The road seemed darker than before, as though it harbored secrets he was only beginning to grasp. Each passing mile intensified his apprehension, yet his need for clarity outweighed any fear. Eventually, he pulled up to the familiar iron gate. A hush blanketed the grounds, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves. Stepping out of his truck, Mark felt a chill run through him as he made his way toward the church's heavy wooden doors. The structure appeared more imposing now, its stained glass windows dull under a cloudy sky. Inside, a single candle glowed near the altar. Mark hesitated, looking around for someone, anyone, who could confirm what he'd heard on the news. His footsteps echoed through the dimly lit nave, stirring motes of dust in the stale air. After a moment, a priest emerged from a side corridor, greeting Mark with wary curiosity. "I'm looking for Sister Catherine," Mark said, voice tense. "I heard terrible news on the television." The priest's face went ashen at the mention of her name. He explained in a trembling voice that Sister Catherine had indeed been found dead nearly 4 days earlier, her body discovered under horrific circumstances. Mark's mind reeled, struggling to reconcile this information with the memory of driving her here. "I brought her to this church after she flagged me down," he insisted. "She was alive." We spoke. The priest stared, incredulous. Then, as if recalling something frightening, he gestured toward a photograph on the wall. Sister Catherine, smiling serenely in happier times. A small wreath rested beneath the picture. Mark stepped closer, his chest tight. It was undoubtedly the same woman he had met. The priest offered condolences, suggesting that perhaps Mark was confused or mistaken. But Mark knew what he had seen. With his heart pounding, he left the church more unsettled than before, convinced something supernatural or deeply sinister was at play. Though he had come seeking answers, all he found were more questions. Sister Catherine was both undeniably deceased and somehow vividly present in his recollection. One truth remained. The line between the living and the dead had grown disturbingly blurred. Mark left the church with a swirl of thoughts. Could Sister Catherine be a restless spirit seeking help from beyond the grave? The notion felt absurd, yet nothing else seemed possible. He slipped into the driver's seat, breathing heavily. Dim light filtered through the clouds, casting an eerie glow across the grounds. He inserted the key but paused at the sight of something on the passenger seat, a small bracelet and a folded note. Fear clutched his chest. He recognized that bracelet from her wrist. With trembling hands, he picked up the note. In hurried handwriting, it read, "Thank you for helping me reach the church. Without you, I'd never have completed my plan." Mark shuddered. Her plan? The news had reported her vicious end, but had she foreseen it? Had she sought closure or justice from those tied to the church? Reeling, Mark started the engine and drove away. Every bump felt amplified, each shadow hinting at lurking secrets. Part of him wanted to discard the note, to forget it ever happened. Another part insisted he dig deeper to solve the riddle she had left. The bracelet glinted with each passing streetlight, reminding him of this unearthly encounter. He tried to rationalize, but logic seemed a frail shield against his growing dread. He pressed on, mind racing. Who was Sister Catherine, and why had she needed him to bring her here? Reality and the inexplicable now blurred. Mark sensed this mystery was far from over. He couldn't shake the feeling that the note was meant for him alone, urging him forward. Images of Sister Catherine's bruised face flickered in his mind, mingling with the grim details from the news. The fact that she had ended up dead in the woods, apparently long before he even picked her up, defied any normal explanation. Was there a chance she was alive for those final hours, or had he encountered something beyond the realm of the living? The questions only deepened his apprehension. Yet Mark, wary as he was, could not deny a spark of determination igniting within him. That note had to mean something. Mark spent the next day in a restless haze, replaying every detail of his encounter with Sister Catherine and the haunting note she had left behind. He could not bring himself to part with the bracelet, which now felt like a tangible link to a mystery larger than himself. Determined to make sense of the impossible, he pored over local news broadcasts and online articles, searching for any mention of the church or Sister Catherine. His frustration mounted when he found little beyond the standard report of her untimely death. Everything changed the following morning when a shocking headline claimed the lives of two priests affiliated with the very church where Mark had last seen Sister Catherine. According to the news, they had been found dead under suspicious circumstances, their bodies discovered in the early hours, and the authorities were scrambling to piece together what might have happened. At once, Mark felt a chill snake down his spine. Could this have something to do with Sister Catherine's plan? His mind raced. He recalled the subdued terror in her eyes and the bruise on her cheek. Had she known something about these priests? Was there a hidden network of wrongdoing at the church? The note on his passenger seat suggested Sister Catherine had aimed to accomplish something significant by arriving at that place. Now, with two priests dead, Mark could not help but suspect a direct correlation. The question was who, or what, was behind these gruesome events. Against his better judgment, Mark decided to return to the diner where he had first heard the news of Sister Catherine's death. Perhaps the staff or patrons had new information about the tragedy unfolding in their midst. Sitting at the counter, he listened intently to hushed whispers and fragments of conversation. Several regulars spoke of an evil presence lurking at the church, while others dismissed such talk as superstitious nonsense. Yet one detail surfaced repeatedly. Those priests had once held considerable sway, and rumors hinted they might have been involved in dark dealings. Mark's stomach churned. Could Sister Catherine have been a victim of their cruelty, or was she seeking retribution? The possibility she had endured some horrific injustice weighed heavily on him, fueling both outrage and dread. Torn between fear of the unknown and a fierce need for answers, he resolved to investigate further. Late that afternoon, he drove back toward the church, the bracelet tucked safely in his pocket. The sky above was thick with gray clouds, and a bitter wind whipped across the lonely road. As he neared the iron gate, he noticed a cluster of police vehicles stationed near the entrance, lights flashing silently. Mark parked at a discreet distance, his pulse thrumming in his ears. He observed officers moving in and out of the church, their grim expressions confirming something terrible had transpired inside. A single question pounded through his mind. If Sister Catherine had been murdered days before he ever picked her up, who, or what, had really stepped into his truck? And how did these new deaths connect to the hidden plan she had so cryptically mentioned? After the unsettling events of the previous day, Mark set off once again on his delivery route with a heavy heart and a mind still burdened by unanswered questions. Determined to leave the disturbing memories behind, he drove through the winding roads with a faint hope that routine would restore his sense of normalcy. Yet, as he passed the stretch where he had first met Sister Catherine, a chill ran down his spine. In a moment of anxious impulse, he pressed harder on the accelerator, as if trying to outrun the specter of that encounter. Suddenly, without warning, the truck's tire began to lose pressure. The vehicle shuddered violently, forcing Mark to pull over onto the shoulder of the deserted highway. Under the dim glow of a distant streetlight, he climbed out to inspect the damage. The cool night air was punctuated by the sound of his own heavy breathing and the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle wind. As he knelt beside the tire, preparing to change it, he heard a faint sound emanating from inside the cab, a soft rustle, almost like a whisper. Hesitating, Mark cast a wary glance back into the truck. To his shock and mounting dread, he saw a familiar silhouette settling into the front seat once again. It was Sister Catherine. Her presence was inexplicable yet unmistakable, and the realization sent a jolt of fear through him. Frozen for a moment, he struggled with the decision to ignore the anomaly or confront it head-on. The eerie repetition of events made it impossible for him to dismiss what he was witnessing. With trembling resolve, Mark realized that fate was drawing him back into a mystery he could no longer evade. As he stood there, the silent figure of Sister Catherine reappeared, a haunting reminder that some encounters refuse to fade away, no matter how desperately one tries to escape them. Not long after replacing the tire and resuming his journey, Mark's unease deepened. While navigating a narrow bend in the darkened road, a soft, almost imperceptible voice suddenly emanated from within the truck. Startled, he slammed on the brakes, the abrupt halt echoing through the quiet night. His heart pounded as he hurriedly turned to face the interior, unsure of what he might see. With trembling hands, Mark slowly opened the window. What he witnessed made his blood run cold. There, seated in the passenger seat, was Sister Catherine, but she looked utterly transformed. The serene composure he remembered was replaced by a look of desperate anguish. A steady stream of blood trickled from her hand, and her disheveled appearance bore the marks of a struggle. It appeared that, driven by hunger or need, she had attempted to retrieve fruit from a set of bags stored in the back of the truck. In doing so, a sharp, hidden object had injured her hand. Mark, a man known for his level-headedness and mature understanding, was momentarily rendered speechless by the surreal tableau. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stammered, "Who are you? Are you human or something else?" The question hung in the air, laden with fear and uncertainty. Sister Catherine's gaze met his with an intensity that seemed to bridge the gap between life and death. In a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak, a voice that carried the weight of sorrow and a mystery too profound to explain. For a long, suspended moment, the night seemed to hold its breath as Mark grappled with the impossible reality unfolding before him. Mark's heart pounded as he stared at the figure before him, blood still trickling from her injured hand. His voice, trembling with a mix of anger and desperation, broke the silence. "Tell me who you are," he demanded, eyes fixed on her. "If you're dead, how can you be here? And explain, did you kill those priests?" The woman's eyes, filled with sorrow and a haunted determination, met his gaze. After a long, agonizing pause, she spoke in a soft, trembling tone. "I am not Sister Catherine," she confessed. "My name is Salisa." Mark's breath caught in his throat. Salisa, the name reverberated in his mind as he struggled to comprehend the revelation. "You're saying you're her twin?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How is that possible?" Salisa nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, Catherine and I were born together, identical in every way. But fate was unkind to us. Catherine was forced into a life as a nun, a role I never desired. In that very church, a sinister conspiracy was unfolding, a dark scheme to exploit and ruin the lives of innocent girls. When Catherine discovered the truth and attempted to expose it, those responsible silenced her in the most brutal manner. Her words trembled in the cold night air, each syllable laden with grief and resolve. I assumed her identity not to deceive, but because I vowed to avenge her suffering. The priests, corrupted by power and complicit in that unholy game, became the instruments of her demise. I could no longer stand by and watch such evil go unpunished. Mark listened, shock and pity mingling with a deep sense of foreboding. "So you took matters into your own hands?" he asked softly. "I did," Salisa admitted, her voice firm despite the pain. "I ended their lives to honor Catherine's memory and to protect those who might otherwise fall victim to their cruelty. I never chose this path willingly, but injustice left me no alternative." As her confession hung in the air, Mark felt the weight of a terrible truth. In that moment, the boundary between the living and the dead blurred, forcing him to confront a reality more sinister than he ever imagined. He sat in stunned silence, grappling with the enormity of her revelation and the dark quest for retribution that had consumed them both. The night grew colder as the echoes of her words settled in, leaving him with questions that would haunt him long into the coming days. Salisa spoke with a steady yet trembling voice as she began to reveal the darkest secrets that had led her to this fateful encounter. "My innocent sister was brutally murdered by merciless oppressors," she said, her eyes shimmering with sorrow and rage. "I could not stand by and watch her suffer the indignity of being silenced. That is why I came to the church that night. No one knew that I was her twin, identical in appearance yet carrying a different destiny. I took your lift not by chance but with a purpose. I hid in the shadows of that very church to plan my revenge." Mark listened in stunned silence, his mind racing to absorb every word. Salisa continued. "When the time came, I took matters into my own hands. I confronted those corrupted priests who had a hand in my sister's tragic end. I was driven by a force I can scarcely explain, a blend of grief, anger, and an unyielding desire for justice. I dispatched them in swift, decisive acts of retribution, ensuring they could harm no more innocent souls." Her voice softened, laced with both pain and resolve. "Without you, Mark, I would never have been able to set my plan into motion. Your kindness that night gave me the strength to see it through. I left that note and the bracelet as tokens of gratitude and as a reminder of the unexpected bond that formed between us." Mark's heart pounded with a mixture of shock and admiration. In that moment, he realized the profound courage hidden beneath Salisa's determined exterior. Their shared experience had unveiled a truth that transcended the boundaries of life and death. As the investigation deepened, the authorities eventually shut down the church after uncovering evidence of its dark secrets and corrupt rituals. In the days that followed, as the oppressive shadows of the past began to recede, Mark and Salisa discovered solace in each other's company. Their connection, forged in tragedy and emboldened by a mutual quest for justice, gradually blossomed into a tender, unspoken love. They spent long hours discussing the horrors they had witnessed and the hope for a future free of such cruelty. Not long after, in a humble yet heartfelt ceremony attended by a few close friends, Mark and Celisa united in marriage. Together, they vowed to honor the memory of those lost to injustice and to protect the innocent from the clutches of corruption. In their union, a promise was made, a promise that even in the wake of unspeakable sorrow, love and courage could light the way to a new beginning.